Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere damp, dark, and deeply aromatic. So go ahead and dim the lights, take a deep breath, though maybe not too deep, and get comfortable. Because we're about to drift into the world of the Victorian. Doss House, the cheap, overcrowded sleeping dens that kept the poorest of London's poor just this side of the grave. It's the 19th century. The air in London is thick with coal smoke, fog, and something else. Something like warm cabbage and despair. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Factories are belching out soot by the ton, and the streets are lined with humanity's leftovers. Chimney sweeps, match girls, rag pickers, drunks, and those unlucky enough to have caught the wrong cough in the wrong decade. And when the day's scavenging, begging, or body-breaking labor was done, where did all these souls go to sleep? Well, sleep might be too generous a word. They went to the Doss House. A Doss House was basically Victorian code for somewhere marginally better than the gutter. You paid a few pennies to spend the night in a room that smelled like boiled socks, surrounded by people who hadn't seen a bathtub since the reign of George III. But before we squeeze inside, let's take a quick walk down one of those famous London alleys. You know the kind, narrow enough that if you stretch your elbows out, you can touch both sides. It's wet. It's uneven. There's something oozing along the cobblestones that you don't want to identify. And the gaslight flickers weakly. Through the fog, which is not romantic, it's mostly smoke, sewage, and industrial dust pretending to be weather. Now, tucked in the corner, half hidden behind a pile of crates, you'll see a door. Above it, a sign in faded paint. Lodgings, 2 pence a night. Congratulations, you found your Doss House, the entry fee to misery. The price varied, depending on how fancy or less awful the place was. 2 pence might get you a 4-penny coffin, while the truly broke could sleep sitting up for a penny. Yes, that's right. The penny sit-up was a real thing. You'd literally pay a penny to sit on a bench all night, shoulder to shoulder, with strangers trying not to nod off because if you did, you'd fall forward and hit your head on the communal spittoon. If you were lucky enough to afford a bit more, you could rent a space on what was charmingly called a rope bed. Imagine a thick rope stretched across the room, and you lean forward on it, arms dangling half asleep. That's not a joke. It was the budget version of a mattress. The rope sleepers were common enough that cartoonists of the day loved sketching them, usually with some poor guy drooling onto his boots. And for the high rollers, those who'd somehow scraped together 4 pence, you could get an actual bed. Well, something resembling a bed. A wooden box, really, about the size of a coffin, lined with a bit of straw or maybe an old sack if the owner was feeling generous. Inside, the smell of survival. Now that we're checked in, let's take in the atmosphere. The air inside a Doss House was alive. That's not poetic exaggeration. It was literally moving, thick with heat, breath, sweat, and fleas. The smell? A combination of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, cheap gin, and damp clothes. Add to that the faint perfume of human desperation, and you're there. There's no privacy. Every bed or box is crammed side by side. You can hear every cough, snore, and muttered nightmare. Someone's got consumption. Someone else is trying to pick lice off their shirt. Someone's whispering about a job that might pay 3 pence if the foreman doesn't cheat them again. The room's dim, the candles long burned out, and the walls are sweating from the humidity of too many bodies in too small a space. There's no ventilation except for the occasional broken window, which no one repairs because cold air is the enemy when you can't afford a blanket. If you close your eyes, you can hear the shuffle of boots outside, the sound of another dozen people hoping there's still room for them. And maybe, just maybe, a city constable passing by, pretending not to notice the illegal gin being poured from a teapot in the corner. Meet the regulars. Every Doss House had its regulars. Let's meet a few of them, shall we? There's old Peg-Leg Tom, who used to be a sailor until the Thames docks chewed him up. He's got one leg, one eye, and a deep affection for songs that make everyone else groan. Next to him is Martha, who sells matches during the day and gossip at night. She's 40 but looks 60, mostly because coal dust and heartbreak age you like vinegar. Over by the far wall, young Jimmy, a boy of about 12, tries to sleep sitting up. He's a mudlark, one of those river scavengers who waded through the Thames at low tide looking for anything he could sell. Bits of rope, lost coins, maybe even a dead rat he could trade for food. And in the corner, snoring softly, there's Mrs. Green, who everyone just calls Mother. No one knows where she came from or how long she's been there. She just is, like the smell or the damp. The Doss housekeeper. Now, presiding over all this is the Doss housekeeper, usually an ex-laborer or widow, someone tough enough to manage the chaos. They'd collect the coins at the door, keep a vague eye on the place, and occasionally throw out anyone too drunk or too dead to stay. These keepers were part landlord, part warden, part reluctant therapist. They knew everyone's story, mostly because there wasn't much else to do but talk. They'd patch up fights, break up thefts, and sometimes smuggle in a doctor when things got bad. Though usually, if someone got sick enough, they were just removed quietly in the morning. The luxury of cleanliness, of course, was theoretical. The idea of washing was a kind of abstract Victorian dream, usually reserved for people who could afford soap. A Doss house might have a single wash basin for 50 people, and if you wanted hot water, you'd better bring your own kettle, or just blow on it and hope. Rats were regular tenants, fleas were landlords, and the bedding, if you can call it that, was rarely changed. You didn't need to be an epidemiologist to predict what happened next. Outbreaks of typhus, tuberculosis, and every other grim-sounding disease you can think of. But to the people who stayed here, it was home. Or at least, it was not the street. And that was enough. A city of contradictions. What made Victorian London so bleakly fascinating was the sheer contrast. A few streets away, you had gentlemen in top hats dining on oysters and champagne. Meanwhile, in the Doss house, someone was pawning their shoes for a crust of bread. The city had become a living paradox, glittering wealth stacked directly on top of rotting poverty. And in between, the Doss houses, acting like little pressure valves for society's unwanted. The middle class called it a necessary evil. The poor called it a roof. And reformers like Charles Booth and Henry Mayhew called it a national embarrassment. Though, to their credit, they actually went inside and documented what they saw. Mayhew described one house in 1851 that could fit over 200 people, sleeping in tiers like a ship's hold. The smell, he wrote, was enough to make the strongest man weep. A brief glimpse of hope, sort of. By the late 19th century, things almost got better. Philanthropists like Lord Rowton decided to build model lodging houses, cleaner, safer alternatives for working men. These had real beds, running water, even lockers for personal belongings. A kind of budget hotel for the moral poor. But of course, even that came with strings attached. You had to be sober, clean, and respectful, which meant a lot of the Doss house crowd, the drunks, the beggars, the women, were still left outside. Progress, Victorian style. Make a rule, then congratulate yourself for enforcing it. And so, the night drifts. On back in our Doss house, the candles are gone. The snores have settled into a strange kind of lullaby. You can hear someone coughing softly, someone muttering a prayer, someone else quietly crying into their sleeve. Outside, the city keeps moving. Omnibuses rumbling, church bells tolling, factories hissing. But in here, time stands still. For a few pennies, these souls have bought themselves one more night of warmth. Tomorrow, they'll scatter back into the city's veins, sweeping, hauling, begging, scavenging. But for now, they rest. Or try to. And as we drift with them through the dark air of the Victorian underworld, you can't help but think. London was a place of endless ambition, endless invention, and endless poverty. And somehow, All of that fit under the same smoky sky. Aye. All right, welcome back. You're still in the Doss house. Lucky you. The night's not over yet, and neither is the smell. Let's ease into this one quietly, like slipping back under a damp blanket. Because believe it or not, even in this cramped, stinking world of poverty, there were rules. Unspoken ones, mostly. You didn't get a laminated guidebook when you checked in, but there was a rhythm, a kind of fragile social order that kept everything from collapsing completely into chaos. And for the people living here, knowing those rules was as essential as finding the next meal. Mornings, if you could call them. That morning in a Doss house began when the keeper decided it did. Usually just after dawn or whenever it felt like the air had turned from stifling to merely thick. The light that trickled in through the grimy windows wasn't golden or uplifting. It was gray, reluctant, and filtered through London's eternal fog. The first sound was coughing, not delicate coughing. This was the Victorian Poor's orchestra, the deep hacking of tuberculosis, the dry rasp of coal dust, and the wet splutter of something unidentifiable but definitely contagious. Then came the movement. People sat up, groaning, rubbing their necks from where they'd been pressed against rough boards or rope lines all night. Someone swore softly because a rat had chewed through their pocket. Someone else checked their boots to make sure they hadn't been stolen. Breakfast? If you were lucky, maybe a heel of bread from the night before. Otherwise, you started the day on an empty stomach and an empty hope. Outside, the city was already alive. Horses clopping, factory whistles blowing, milkmen calling out prices that no one here could afford. One by one, they'd shuffle out. The penny sitters, stiff and bleary-eyed. The coffin sleepers, brushing straw off their coats. The rope sleepers, rubbing at the rope burns on their chests. And as the room emptied, the keeper would finally throw. Open the door to let in a bit of light and air, or what passed for air in 19th century London. The Doss house hierarchy. Peasants of the poor now, you might think everyone in a Doss house was equally miserable. But no, even in poverty, humans have a remarkable talent for hierarchy. At the very bottom were the casuals, newcomers, wanderers, or anyone too broke to afford more than a penny. They usually didn't last long. Either they found work and moved up, or they got sick and moved, well, out permanently. Then there were the regulars, the long-term residents who'd staked out certain corners or beds. These people had seniority. They might save a penny or two every week by running errands for the keeper or keeping order when fights broke out. Above them, believe it or not, were the respectables. Men and women who had once had steady jobs, dockers, laundresses, tailors, before illness, drink, or sheer bad luck pushed them down here. They often clung to shreds of dignity, keeping their clothes neatly folded, saying please and thank you, or avoiding conversation with the more chaotic lodgers. And then there were the keeper's favorites, the ones who helped out, tattled, or just knew how to flatter. They might get a better bed or a spot near the fire. Everyone else hated them quietly. Social mobility in the Doss house was technically possible, but only in the same way it was possible to climb a greased pole. Unspoken rules of survival. There was no posted code of conduct, but you learned fast if you wanted to keep your head or your shoes. Rule 1, mind your own business. Whatever you saw, you didn't see. If a couple was fighting, if someone slipped a hand into a pocket, if a man crawled into a bed that wasn't his, your best option was to look away. Rule 2, never boast. If you'd managed to earn a few extra pence, don't mention it. Flashing coins in a room full of hungry people was an excellent way to wake up without them. Rule 3, share, but strategically. Sharing a bit of bread or a drop of gin might win you favor, but give too much and you'd be branded a soft touch. The Victorian underclass respected kindness, but only if it came with teeth. Rule 4, protect your blanket like it's the crown jewels. A blanket was currency. People would trade them, steal them, or even rent them for a night. It wasn't unheard of for a blanket to have 5 different owners in a week. Rule 5. Silence after lights out. Not for peace, for privacy. Everyone had their own misery, and the darkness was the one place they could hide it. The gender divide men and women often lodged in separate doss houses, though separate was a flexible term. Some larger ones had divided rooms, while others just had a curtain. Women's lodging houses were particularly grim. Many were run by self-proclaimed moral reformers who charged extra for the privilege of being judged. You could stay, but you had to sit through prayers, wear appropriate clothing, and promise not to drink or associate with men, which in practice meant no fun, no warmth, and no relief. That's why many women preferred mixed doss houses despite the risk. At least there they could blend in, find protection, or sometimes a partner. It wasn't romance exactly, more like survival in pairs. 2 people could split a bed, watch each other's belongings, and maybe scrape together a meal. It's worth noting that in this world, marriage was often as informal as everything else. You might meet in a doss house, share a space for a few months, and call each other husband or wife. No priest required. Evening. The return of the lost by sunset, the doss house came alive again. The streets spat out their weary, filthy crowds, and the familiar shuffle of feet filled the doorway. The keeper would sit by the entrance, collecting coins, ticking off names, and grunting reminders like, "No gin tonight, mind you." Of course, there was gin tonight. There was always gin. It was cheaper than tea, easier to find than food, and strong enough to make you forget your lungs were rotting. People brought in whatever they'd earned that day. Maybe a few coins from selling rags, or a chunk of coal swiped from a cart. They'd huddle in corners, lighting tiny stubs of candles, swapping stories, trading gossip, or just sitting in silence, staring at the floor. And every so often, someone would start singing. Not loudly, not beautifully, just softly, a few lines of an old ballad. The kind that sounded like a prayer disguised as a tune. Others might join in, voices cracked and low, until the song melted back into the hum of the room. What they ate, or pretended to. Dinner, if it happened, was usually a miracle. Some houses sold hot soup for an extra penny, but soup is a generous description. It was more like warm, beige water with a few floating mysteries, possibly vegetables, possibly yesterday's accidents. If you had no money, you might beg a crust from someone kinder or chew on tobacco to trick your stomach into silence. Some even resorted to eating candle stubs or scraping the char from burnt bread. The Victorians were nothing if not inventive in their misery. Still, there was one communal luxury: tea, real or fake, sometimes brewed from used leaves rescued from the gutters of wealthier neighborhoods. They'd dry them, boil them again, and pretend disease and desperation. If you were unwell, you stayed quiet. Doctors cost money, hospitals cost more, and being sick was seen as weakness. But sickness was everywhere. Tuberculosis was the big one, the white plague. It spread easily in tight quarters, and a cough could echo through a doss house like a funeral bell. Lice, scabies, cholera, all the classics made regular appearances. When someone died, which happened often, the keeper would quietly remove the body in the early morning. Sometimes there'd be a brief hush, a moment where everyone pretended to care. Then the day would start again, like it always did. Tiny comforts, and yet, somehow, people made lives here. They found friendship. They told jokes. They helped each other patch torn boots or share a secret stash of gin. Humans, it seems, will build community even in the worst of places. Someone might have a broken fiddle, and they'd play it after dark. The sound would be wobbly, haunting but oddly soothing. A few couples might dance, if you could call it that, swaying slowly in the dim light. There were even rituals of care. The woman who brushed a child's hair with her fingers, the man who mended someone else's coat without being asked. Tiny gestures in a place that forgot what gentleness looked like. The eyes of the reformers by. The mid to late 1800s, the Doss House had become a favorite topic for journalists and social reformers. Men like Henry Mayhew and George Sims loved describing them in lurid detail, though usually from a safe distance. Mayhew wrote that the smell of a lodging house clung to the hair and clothes for days, and that one could feel poverty upon the skin. Sims, in his famous essay, How the Poor Live, 1883, described rows of human beings sleeping like corpses before the day of resurrection. They weren't wrong, but they also weren't quite right. What they missed was that the people inside weren't just corpses in waiting. They were stubbornly, painfully alive. The Victorians loved moralizing about poverty, but rarely about the systems that caused it. They saw the Doss House as proof of moral decay, not economic design. Blame the drunk, not the landlord. Blame the poor, not the price of bread. Sound familiar? Yeah. Some things never really change. Night falls. Again by midnight, the Doss House was full once more. The room glowed faintly with candlelight, and the air grew thick again. Bodies shifted. Someone muttered a prayer, another cursed softly. The rope sleepers leaned forward, heads nodding onto their arms. The coffin sleepers turned in their boxes, trying to forget where they were. Outside, the streets were quiet, save for the occasional echo of hooves or the distant cry of a night watchman. Inside, the city's forgotten thousands rested, wrapped in rags and dreams of better days that would never come. And somewhere in that half-sleep, between coughing fits and snores, London kept breathing. Slow, smoky, indifferent. Hey again, still with me? Good. Let's step quietly outside the Doss House now, though fair warning, the air out here isn't much fresher. It's just a different flavor of foul. The mix shifts from sweat and gin to soot and sewage, with maybe a hint of rotting cabbage if the wind's right. We're in the heart of London's East End, sometime around 1885. The city is alive, and not necessarily in the pleasant, bustling sense. It's pulsing, wheezing, dripping, creaking. Every building seems to lean a little, as if exhausted from holding up another day of grime. And out here, this is where the real work of survival happens. The Doss House is the bed. The street is everything else. The office, the kitchen, the theater, and the battlefield. So let's take a slow walk through the waking streets of the Victorian poor and see what life looks like when you've got nothing but your wits, your hands, and a very questionable pair of boots. The Great Divide, two Londons in one before we sink into the filth. Let's remember something. Victorian London wasn't one city. It was two. On one side, you had the West End, gas lamps, horse-drawn carriages, dinner parties where people debated poetry, while servants died quietly of exhaustion. The streets there smelled faintly of cigars, perfume, and smugness. And then there was the East End, a sprawl of tenements, alleys, and slums where every corner seemed to exhale despair. It was cheap, it was crowded, and it was home to the working poor who kept the rest of London running. The contrast was so absurd it bordered on performance art. You could literally walk from a silk-draped ballroom into a slum in 10 minutes flat. One journalist at the time called it a city of light built upon a city of shadows, and the shadows were busy. The street trades, how to earn a crust you've left the Doss House with maybe 1 or 2 pence left, if that. So what do? You find something, anything, that can be sold. Welcome to the world of street trades, the weird, wild economy of the Victorian underclass. There were mudlarks, mostly children who waded through the Thames at low tide searching for scrap metal, rope, or anything shiny enough to trade. The river was basically liquid garbage, dead cats, broken crockery, industrial sludge, and yet people made a living there, barefoot. Then there were the costermongers, or street sellers. They'd push wooden carts full of bruised apples, wilted cabbages, or eels. Yes, eels, London's favorite cheap protein. shouting their prices in sing-song rhymes. Hot eels, penny a dish. If you had a bit of muscle, you might become a casual laborer, unloading cargo at the docks, hauling coal, sweeping streets. The problem was, the work was never guaranteed. You'd line up at dawn outside a factory or yard, and if the foreman didn't pick you, you went hungry. Women had fewer options, and none of them good. Many took in laundry or sewing, which paid miserably. Others sold flowers, matches, or cheap trinkets. And when that failed, well, some sold the only thing left to sell. The Victorians called it the social evil, as though the women themselves had invented it. The truth was simpler. Starvation is persuasive. Children of the streets, children were everywhere. You couldn't walk 10 steps without tripping over one, ragged, barefoot, darting between carts. Some worked as mudlarks or crossing sweepers, clearing muck from street corners in exchange for a halfpenny. Others were shoeblacks, flower sellers, or newsboys, and some just didn't work at all. They survived on wits alone, begging or stealing when they could. Dickens didn't invent Oliver Twist. He just took notes. The city even had gangs of street kids, known as the Arabs or urchins. They moved like flocks, sleeping in alleys, warming themselves by factory vents, stealing bread or coal. Police mostly ignored them until something was stolen from the wrong person. A child's average height in some parts of East London was stunted by years of malnutrition. Their hair was thin, their teeth were missing, and their eyes had that particular dull brightness of kids who've seen too much. And yet, they played. They laughed. They chased rats with sticks and turned refuse heaps into playgrounds. Because even in misery, children will find games, markets, and muck now. Let's head toward one of the East End's famous markets. Maybe Whitechapel or Spitalfields. It's noisy, cramped, and smells like someone's been boiling onions in sewage. Carts line the narrow lanes, piled with whatever the day's trade has yielded. Spoiled fruit, fish heads, dented tinware, second-hand boots. The cries of sellers overlap in a kind of chaotic chorus. You can hear the hiss of frying eels, the clink of coins, the laughter of someone too drunk to stand. Dogs bark, babies cry, and somewhere in the background, a man with a barrel organ plays a tune that's been stuck in your head since 1860. Here, everything is negotiable. Prices, morals, even the definition of fresh. You might buy a loaf of bread that's more mold than flour, or a pair of trousers that come with their previous owner's lice included. No extra charge. And yet, the market is alive. It's where the poor came not just to buy, but to exist. To gossip, to complain, to remember they were still human. The lodging house versus the street. For many, the street wasn't just a workplace, it was home. The Doss house was a roof, sure, but not everyone could afford that luxury every night. Some slept under bridges, in doorways, or in abandoned stables. Others found corners in churchyards, curling up against gravestones because they were at least made of stone. Solid, safe, and less likely to kick you in your sleep. Police called these people vagrants. The newspapers called them the dangerous classes. Society didn't really have a category for too poor to live, too stubborn to die. Gin glorious gin now. If you're thinking all this sounds unbearable, you're right. And that's why gin existed. Victorian gin wasn't the sophisticated botanical craft stuff you get today. It was barely drinkable poison brewed in back rooms and sold by the pint. They called it blue ruin, mother's ruin, or, less poetically, cheap comfort. For a penny, you could forget the cold. For 2, you could forget your name. There were whole streets lined with gin shops, some no bigger than closets, where a woman behind the counter would pour out shots for customers who looked like ghosts. Reformers tried to shut them down, of course. But when your choices are drink gin or freeze, morality tends to lose the debate. The soundtrack of survival London's poor had their own kind of music. Ballads, work songs, hymns reworded into street jokes. You'd hear old sailors singing about lost ships, women crooning lullabies to borrowed children, and street performers belting out tunes for coins tossed into hats. One popular song in the 1870s went, "We've got no bed. We've got no bread, we sleep by the Thames and call it shed." It wasn't exactly upbeat, but it got a laugh. And sometimes laughter was worth more than a meal. The night watch and the unwatched as night fell. The streets took on a strange, eerie calm. Gas lights flickered in the fog, and the last market calls faded. The police, the peelers, as they were known, made their rounds. But in the poorest parts of town, they rarely ventured far. There were too many alleys, too many bodies, too many shadows that swallowed trouble whole. Crime was everywhere, but not the glamorous kind you read about in penny novels. It was desperate theft, bread stolen from carts, coins lifted from pockets, laundry snatched from lines. A man might go to prison for a loaf, while a banker could ruin thousands and still make it home for supper. Justice, in Victorian London, was mostly for those who could afford it. Charity, shame, and the poor law if you were too sick to work, too weak to beg. There was always the workhouse. That's what passed for welfare, a system designed less to help than to humiliate. You'd surrender your clothes, your freedom, and often your family in exchange for gruel and hard labor. The Victorians called it moral improvement. Everyone else called it hell. Some chose the street instead. Pride, even among the broken, was a stubborn thing. Charity organizations cropped up too. Soup kitchens, missions, reform homes. But they often came with sermons and suspicion. You could have a bowl of stew as long as you confessed your sins and promised to behave. The city breathes, the poor endure by midnight. The streets were quiet again. The fog thickened, swallowing sound. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere else, a man sang softly to himself, too drunk to stand. The doss houses filled up, the pubs emptied, and London, that vast, sweating machine of empire, turned over in its sleep. For the poor, tomorrow would look exactly the same. Another day of scraping, selling, coughing, enduring, but still, they carried on. They always did. Because the city might not have cared whether they lived or died, but they cared for each other in small, invisible ways that history usually forgets. A shared crust, a knot in the street, a blanket split two ways, and so they kept breathing in the cracks of the empire. So, the lamps have burned down to their stubs. The floorboards are tacky with old beer and spilled broth. And London's midnight hum has settled into that particular hush that only a city full of half-asleep, half-starving people can make. Welcome back to the Doss House. It's well past midnight now. And if you're listening from a warm bed, maybe with a blanket that doesn't itch or smell faintly of onions, you might want to thank your ancestors for avoiding this particular chapter of London life. Because what we're floating into now is the Victorian underclass's version of sweet dreams. Let's start with the beds, or what passed for them. In most doss houses, you didn't get a private bunk or even a mattress. You got a spot. Sometimes that meant a plank of wood with a bit of straw. Sometimes a canvas sling strung between posts, sagging just enough to make you question gravity and your life choices. And then there were the four-penny coffins. Don't worry, they weren't actual coffins. They just looked like them, narrow wooden boxes with a thin layer of straw where you could collapse for the night. Side by side with dozens of others doing the exact same thing. If you wanted to save a penny or two, you could opt for the penny sit-up. This was the budget version of sleep. You'd sit upright on a bench all night, with a rope strung across your chest to lean on. Yes, really, a rope. That was your pillow. In the morning, an attendant would walk down the line, untie the rope, and everyone would tumble forward onto the floor because, it's dawn and time for the next desperate crowd. Now, imagine the air in there. The windows, if there were any, stayed shut, partly for warmth, partly because opening them would mean the rats could wander in even easier. The smell was a layered thing. Sweat, cheap gin, feet, coal dust, and something sour that no one could quite identify but everyone pretended not to notice. The scent of too many lives compressed into too little space. You'd think all this would be quiet. But sleep in the Doss house wasn't silent. It was a chorus. Snoring, coughing, muttering. The occasional cry of someone mid-nightmare. Babies mewling. Rats scratching in the corners. And through it all, the sound of London's rain, steady and different, soaking the alleys outside and dripping through the roof when it got ambitious. Still, for the people inside, this was safety, at least compared to the streets. There were stories of men who froze to death under bridges, or women who vanished between alleyways, swallowed up by the dark. The Doss house might be filthy, but it was alive, and that counted for something. Let's meet a few of its residents, shall we? There's old Joe. No one remembers his last name or if he ever had one. He claims he once worked on the railways, though his hands look more suited to sweeping streets. He spends his evenings mumbling stories about trains to anyone who'll listen, or no one at all. Then there's Annie, who comes in with 2 children, both under 6, both coated in soot like small Victorian ghosts. She pays for a single coffin bed, then tries to wedge all 3 of them in. You can tell she's been here before. She knows the trick of using her shawl to cover their faces against the cold drafts. And at the far end, there's a new arrival, a young man, maybe 20, though the grime makes him look older. His hands shake from gin withdrawal. He doesn't say much, but the others recognize the look. Everyone here is running from something. Debts, workhouse overseers, or just the weight of existing in a city that doesn't care whether you wake up tomorrow. Let's float a little higher, above the bunks and benches, past the flicker of the lamp flame, and listen to the caretaker closing up the front door. He's a thin, tired man with a patchy beard and a voice like gravel. He knows everyone's name and none of their stories. He's the Doss house equivalent of a gatekeeper to the underworld, taking coins, counting heads, and making sure no one dies quietly without notice. Sometimes people did die here. Heart failure, cold infection, take your pick. In such cases, the body would be carried out in the early morning, before the next shift of desperate souls came knocking. Death wasn't an event. It was just part of the nightly turnover. Outside, the city was still pulsing. The gas lamps flickered along the main road. Cab horses clopped past, their hooves muffled by mist. Somewhere, a factory whistle blew, marking a shift change for men who probably lived in places not much better than this. And through it all, the smell of the Thames lingered in the distance, foul and heavy, carrying every secret the city didn't want to keep. If you're wondering whether anyone ever escaped this life, some did, yes. A lucky few found steady work or charity from one of the many reformers who roamed London's slums looking for souls to save. But most didn't. The Doss house was a trap disguised as a refuge. Once you stepped through its doors, you were marked by the smell, the accent, the posture of someone who belonged to the bottom rung. Employers could spot it instantly. The social reformers called it the underworld, which sounded dramatic, but to the people inside, it was just Tuesday night. As dawn approached, a strange ritual began. The sleepers stirred. The rope across the benches was dropped. Feet shuffled, curses muttered. A few men stretched stiffly, groaning. Someone laughed at nothing in particular. A tin cup clanged against a wall. The Doss house came alive again. Not like a home waking up, but like an engine sputtering reluctantly back to motion. Outside, the milkmen started their rounds. Street sweepers scraped at the gutters. And slowly, one by one, the Dossers filed out, into the fog, the rain, and the indifferent hum of the waking city. Some would find work. Others would wander until the next night brought them back to the same door. And as the caretaker locked up behind them, he might look around at the now empty room and sigh, knowing it would fill again soon. The sheets wouldn't cool before someone else claimed them. The air wouldn't clear before another cough replaced it. The Victorian Doss house was less a place and more a loop, an endless cycle of exhaustion, survival, and the faintest, most fragile kind of hope. And so, as the morning light seeps through the cracked window panes, we'll drift away from this place quietly, so we don't wake the ones still trying to catch their last few minutes of rest. Let's float gently out into the fog, toward another corner of London's forgotten poor, because this story isn't quite done yet. We've seen how they slept. Next, we'll see how they lived. Next, we'll see how they lived. Morning in Victorian London didn't so much begin as it crept in, slowly, grudgingly, through curtains of fog that seemed to resent the sun's existence. The city stretched, coughed, and began to grind its gears again, and inside the Doss houses, the waking was not so much a gentle affair as it was mandatory. The rope benches were untied, sending the penny sleepers tumbling forward like dominoes. The coffins emptied, the straw rustled, and the air grew thicker with the unmistakable perfume of unwashed humanity and cold breath. Welcome to breakfast, Victorian Slum Edition. Now, don't imagine porridge or tea or anything you'd want to describe as food. Most of the dossers didn't have the luxury of eating right away. A few might fish a crust of bread from a pocket, softened overnight by body heat. Others would linger near the door, hoping to sell a button, a match, or a scrap of cloth for a halfpenny. Just enough to buy tea-like water at a coffee stall down the street. If you had a penny or two left, you might shuffle toward the nearest coffee shop. These weren't cozy cafes. They were smoky, cramped rooms where the coffee was more brown than black, and the only sugar came from luck or the previous customer's spoon. Still, they offered something priceless: heat. A place to thaw your fingers before facing another cold, unforgiving day. And the day ahead wasn't filled with opportunity. It was filled with maybe. Maybe someone needed a hand-loading carts at the docks. Maybe a butcher's boy didn't show up, and you could carry meat around for a few hours. Maybe you could hawk cheap trinkets on a corner before a constable chased you off. For women, the maybes were often darker. A few might sell flowers or sewing. Others, if desperate enough, sold the only thing London guaranteed them control over: their bodies. The city's brothels ranged from shadowy rooms above gin shops to crumbling houses where the windows had been nailed shut long ago. It was a living of sorts, and one that many didn't live long enough to escape. But let's pause on that street scene for a moment. Imagine the sound. Carts rattling over cobblestones, boots splashing through puddles, vendors shouting, "Hot eels! Boiled peas!" 1,000 voices blending into something between music and misery. The fog made everything seem both near and far away, like you were walking inside a dream that smelled faintly of coal smoke and hopeless ambition. If you were a dosser, your job wasn't just to work. It was to avoid looking unemployed. London's poor laws were unforgiving, and constables were always eager to clear out loiterers. If they caught you twice with no proof of work or address, you could be sent to a workhouse. And the workhouse was worse than the doss house. In the workhouse, you lost your name, your freedom, your clothes, and often your family. Husbands, wives, and children were separated. Meals were measured by ounces, sleep by obedience. And if you complained, there was always more stone to break. So most preferred to risk the streets. At least there, you could still choose your misery. Now, reformers like to stroll through these streets, armed with notebooks and moral outrage. Men like Charles Booth, who color-coded entire maps of London according to wealth and destitution. Black meant vicious and semi-criminal, and plenty of doss house neighborhoods were just that. Black on the map, dark in the alleys and invisible to polite society. But for every Booth or Dickens writing about the poor, there were 1,000 others just being poor. No audience, no redemption arc, just daily survival. Let's follow one of them for a moment. Here's Sarah, a laundry worker, or she used to be, before her last employer let her go when her cough became distracting. She still carries her washboard, because if she can find a few pence worth of laundry to scrub, she can maybe afford a doss bed again tonight. She makes her way to the Thames, where the fog clings low and damp. There, other women stand knee-deep in cold, dirty water, washing clothes for people who'll never know their names. The river stinks of industry, ink, sewage, decay, but it's free, and that's what matters. Nearby, a boy named Alfie shouts, "Morning Star! Morning news!" His voice cracks with the cold. He hasn't eaten since yesterday's heel of bread, but he's fast, darting through traffic to grab another stack of papers. He sleeps in a different doss house each week, depending on how well sales go. He dreams of owning shoes that match. And then there's Mr. Pritchard, who claims to be between lodgings, which is a polite way of saying he was thrown out of the last doss house for arguing with the keeper over a stolen blanket. He's been walking since 5 a.m., muttering to himself about Parliament and the price of bread. By noon, the city grows louder, busier, more impatient. The wealthy sweep past in carriages, faces turned away from the smell. They call the poor the residuum, as if they were the sediment left at the bottom of society's teacup. And in a way they were, but that residue kept London running. The street sweepers, porters, costermongers, laundresses, and chimney sweeps, all of them came from the doss houses and returned there by nightfall. It was a strange kind of equilibrium. The city exploited them, despised them, and yet could not function without them. Let's step inside one of the few places that offered something different: the Salvation Army shelters. Founded in the late 19th century, these were an attempt to clean up the doss house idea. You could get a meal, a bath, and a bed for a few pennies more than the usual slum rate. You'd also get a sermon, of course. Repentance was part of the bargain, but for many that was a fair trade. Still, not everyone wanted saving. Some preferred the noise, the dirt, the chaos of the old doss house. It was, in its own way, freedom, an unwashed democracy of failure. By evening, the same people who'd spilled out into the fog that morning would return, some with coins jingling faintly in pockets, others empty-handed. The keeper would unlock the door, take their pennies, and the cycle would begin again. And so it went, day after day, year after year. The faces changed, the hunger stayed. The Victorian doss house wasn't just a symptom of poverty, it was a system of endurance. It kept people alive just long enough to keep them poor. But despite it all, there were small mercies. A shared joke, a warm corner by the stove, someone saving you a place in line. Humanity clung on, even when everything else had fallen away. And as the fog thickened again over London's rooftops, you could almost believe that for a few hours at least. The city's forgotten millions found something like peace in their exhaustion. Let's drift a little farther into the heart of that world, past the shelters, into the workhouses where poverty was given rules, uniforms and punishments. Uniforms and punishments. Let's wander quietly now, out of the fog-drenched alleys and through a heavier kind of gate. The sort that creaks open reluctantly and clangs shut behind you like a sentence being passed. Welcome to the workhouse. If the doss house was the unwashed chaos of desperation, the workhouse was the bureaucratic version of it. Tidier, colder, and infinitely more cruel. This was poverty with paperwork, misery by design. The idea behind it was noble on paper, as most terrible ideas are. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 was meant to help the deserving poor and discourage idleness. The government decided that outdoor relief, giving money or food to the needy, was far too generous. Instead, anyone who wanted help would have to earn it by entering a workhouse. Inside, life was meant to be just harsh enough to make you never want to come back. A deterrent disguised as charity. Let's take a slow walk through one, shall we? First stop, the admission room. You'd hand over your clothes, your possessions, if you had any, and your last ounce of pride. Everything was disinfected, or more accurately, fumigated with sulfur in a room that smelled like burning hope. You'd be given a rough uniform, shapeless, itchy, and in a color that could be best described as Victorian despair. Then came the separation. Families were divided by gender and age, husbands from wives, parents from children. The reasoning was order and morality. The effect was psychological destruction. Many never saw each other again. The men were marched to one ward, the women to another, and the children, small, frightened, clinging to sleeves that were no longer allowed to stay near, were led off to juvenile sections. Inmates, yes, they were called that, rose at dawn to the sound of a bell. Silence was expected. Talking was limited to approved moments, such as work assignments or prayers. The daily routine was precise, mechanical, and utterly joyless. Breakfast might be porridge, thin and gray. Dinner could be soup, or sometimes just bread and cheese. Supper was usually a repeat of lunch, because variety was considered dangerously indulgent. Work began early. Men broke stones or picked oakum, tarred rope fibers pulled apart until your fingers bled. The oakum was used to seal ship hulls, so you could say the poor helped keep the empire afloat, literally. Women scrubbed floors, laundered endless sheets, or mended clothing until their eyes stung. Children were sent to spin, sew, or sort rags, learning the fine art of exhaustion before. Puberty, the workhouse masters, the ones running the place, were often former soldiers or failed. Businessmen with a strong sense of discipline and a weak sense of compassion. They were paid by results, which usually meant saving money, not saving lives. If someone disobeyed the rules, say, spoke too loudly, took an extra bite of bread, or fell asleep during prayers, they could be put on punishment detail. This meant isolation, bread and water diets, or worse, the treadmill. No, not the gym kind. The Victorian treadmill was a wooden wheel that prisoners and paupers had to climb endlessly to power machinery, or sometimes just to prove a point. It went nowhere, accomplished nothing, and exhausted everyone, much like most Victorian social policy. Now, the workhouse wasn't all iron discipline and despair. Occasionally, reformers dropped by. They'd make speeches about moral improvement and the dignity of labor, then leave before dinner was served. A few meant well, of course. Some really believed they were helping, but the system they built crushed the very people it claimed to uplift. Let's meet a few of its inhabitants. There's Mary, 30, but worn to 50. She came here after her husband died in a factory accident, and her landlord evicted her 3 days later. She still writes his name on the edge of her blanket in tiny, invisible stitches, as if she might sew him back into her life. Beside her is little Thomas, age 9, whose mother was sent to the infirmary ward. He spends his days carrying coal buckets up and down staircases taller than he is. The overseer calls it training for self-reliance. Thomas calls it Tuesday. And in the men's ward, there's Mr. Hawthorne, an old clerk whose hands tremble too much for writing now. He was respectable once, in the soft hat and good coat kind of way. But once he ran out of family, the workhouse became his final employer. He copies Bible verses for the chaplain, slowly, carefully, as if afraid of running out of words before breath. In the evenings, the inmates gather in silence for prayers. The chaplain reads something about humility and patience. Most stare blankly at the floor, half listening, half asleep. After prayers comes bedtime. Rows of narrow cots, each identical, each a small echo chamber of coughing and sighs. And outside, beyond the high brick walls, London carries on, its theaters glowing, its factories roaring, its taverns spilling light and laughter into the fog. The city that built the workhouses never really looked at them. They were out of sight, out of mind, convenient, efficient misery. Some Victorians believed this system would eventually eliminate poverty, that the poor would simply reform themselves out of existence. But poverty didn't vanish, it just changed shape. It slipped through the cracks, hid in tenements, and slept under bridges. Even the workhouses began to fill with people who weren't lazy or drunk, but just unlucky. Old age, illness, and accident, a bad harvest. These were enough to earn you a bed in the house of industry. The irony, of course, is that the workhouse produced its own kind of underclass. People so broken by the system that they could no longer live outside it. Some stayed until they died, their names recorded in neat cursive in a ledger no one ever read again. By the late 19th century, attitudes began to shift. Journalists and photographers, most famously Jacob Riis in America and Thomas Barnardo in Britain, started showing the public what poverty looked like. Not just statistics, but faces. Children with hollow cheeks, women with sunken eyes, men whose dignity had been worn thin as their coats. The shock worked, slowly. Public outrage led to reforms, new housing acts, better sanitation, and eventually the decline of the workhouse system. But for decades, it stood as a monument to Victorian logic, that you could cure poverty with punishment. Let's step quietly away from these walls now. Past the barred windows, past the smell of soap and boiled cabbage, out into the cool night where the stars, if you could see them through the soot, still shimmer faintly above London's sprawl. Because as grim as this world was, there were those who tried to change it. Idealists, doctors, reformers, and a few eccentrics who believed that even the poor deserved beauty, education, and a decent place to breathe. So let's wander gently toward them. All right, let's drift slowly now, past the brick walls of the doss houses, past the iron gates of the workhouses, and into the quieter corners of Victorian London. Here, the streets are still foggy, still damp, But you can almost smell something different, a faint trace of hope, of people who actually tried to do something about all this misery. Because, believe it or not everyone in Victorian society was content to ignore the poor. A few people, sometimes wealthy, sometimes eccentric, decided that maybe the city didn't have to be quite so cruel. They weren't saviors exactly. Many were a little overzealous, a little self-righteous, and occasionally just plain annoying. But they made a difference in their own quiet, persistent ways. Charles Booth and the Map of Misery. Let's start with Charles Booth. Now, Booth wasn't a philanthropist in the sentimental sense. He was more of a detective with a notebook, but instead of catching criminals, he cataloged poverty. He walked the streets of London door to door, jotting down names, occupations, and most importantly, income. Booth's great achievement was his color-coded maps. Gold meant rich, pink was comfortable, red meant poor but not desperate, and black was, well, the doss houses, the workhouses, the alleys where people survived on scraps. His maps were meticulous, almost obsessive, and they shocked polite society. Because you see, you could finally see poverty in a concrete way. Not as some abstract moral failing, but as a sprawling, organized presence. Octavia Hill and the Art of Housing next. Let's float toward Octavia Hill, who believed that giving people a clean, safe place to live was the beginning of salvation. Unlike the workhouse, her vision didn't involve uniforms, rules, or punishments. It involved space, sunlight, and dignity. She bought slum properties and converted them into small, manageable homes. She encouraged tenants to take pride in their surroundings, and she was famously strict about cleanliness, but in a human, persuasive sort of way. Tenants often liked her, or at least respected her. Her work laid the foundations for modern social housing. And quietly, she proved something radical, that the poor didn't need punishment to survive. They needed opportunity. Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp-off course. We can't drift past Florence Nightingale without pausing to appreciate the gentle glow of her lamp. While she's mostly remembered for the Crimean War and her revolutionary nursing methods, she also had a vision for public health at home. She believed that disease thrived in squalor. She wrote extensively on ventilation, clean water, and hygiene, and yes, she was terrifyingly meticulous. In her world, a workhouse could be reformed simply by airing out the rooms and washing the floors, which, for Victorian standards, was practically magical. Her ideas didn't instantly cure the doss houses or the slums, but they planted seeds. Slowly, the city began to understand that poverty wasn't just a moral problem, it was a health problem. Josephine Butler and Moral Crusades now, not every reformer was gentle. Some were fiery, determined, and occasionally terrifying in their devotion. Josephine Butler was one of them. She campaigned tirelessly against the Contagious Diseases Acts, which allowed the police to detain and examine women suspected of prostitution. Her work wasn't just about morality, it was about rights. She challenged a society that criminalized women for surviving. In doing so, she gave the poor, and especially women, a voice in a city that had mostly ignored them. Education and the Gentle Revolution education, too, played a quiet role in the slow reshaping of Victorian poverty. Sunday schools, charity schools, and eventually public education offered a sliver of hope to children who would otherwise spend their lives in workhouses or on the streets. Even a few hours of reading, writing, and arithmetic could change the trajectory of a life. A child who learned to read might one day find a job outside the docks. A child who learned hygiene might survive an illness that would have claimed them otherwise. It wasn't a miracle, it was incremental, painstaking, and often invisible. But in a city as vast and indifferent as London, small victories mattered. The power of small acts. What's remarkable is that these reforms didn't always require laws or massive budgets. Sometimes it was just a person with a sense of decency wandering into a street, noticing a child huddled by a wall and offering a warm meal or a kind word. In the crowded chaos of doss houses, alleyways, and workhouses, these small acts were monumental. A warm blanket here, a loaf of bread there, a moment of attention for someone who had been invisible their whole life. These were revolutions, quiet but profound. Even the city itself seemed to cooperate in subtle ways. New public baths opened. Streets were cleaned more regularly. Gas lamps were installed, making night a little less threatening. Slowly, the machinery of the city adapted. Not perfectly, but enough to allow human beings to survive without constant fear of freezing, starving, or vanishing unnoticed. The ghosts that remained. And yet, not everyone was saved. Not everyone was reached. The doss houses persisted into the late 19th century. Workhouses remained grim reminders of institutionalized cruelty. Children continued to work in factories, and the poor were still often invisible. But the gentle revolution of reformers planted ideas that poverty could be mitigated, that the city could care for its citizens. That dignity didn't have to cost money. These ideas didn't always translate into immediate comfort, but they shaped policy, culture, and eventually the streets themselves. They reminded London that the city's most vulnerable were still human, a pause for reflection. And so, as we drift through the fog once more, leaving the workhouses behind, we notice something subtle. Even in a city built on inequality, on smoke, on filth, and on indifference, there were sparks of hope. Some came from maps and data, others from laws and schools. Some came from lamps in the night, or warm soup in a tiny room. And some, quietly, came from the people themselves, the dossers, the children, the women, and men who endured and persisted simply by surviving another day. They were the invisible revolutionaries of their own lives, not remembered in history books, not celebrated in portraits, but real, persistent, enduring. And in that endurance, the city slowly, reluctantly, learned how to breathe a little easier. Next, we'll drift into Part 8, The Children of the Fog, growing up in London's shadowed streets, where we'll follow the smallest and most resilient among the poor as they navigate a city that rarely notices them. Let's float gently now into the world of the smallest Londoners, the ones who dart between puddles, clutch crusts of bread, and learn the art of survival before they can even tie their own boots. In the foggy alleys, the smoke-smeared lanes, and the narrow courts behind bustling markets, children were everywhere. They weren't just present, they were essential. They carried messages, ran errands, swept streets, polished shoes, hawked newspapers, and sometimes simply existed in order to survive. Childhood in Victorian London's East End was a concept more imagined by reformers than experienced by reality. For most of these kids, the city was their playground, their classroom, their labor camp, and their battleground. Early mornings, cold-feet children's days began before dawn. Boots were often optional if they existed at all. Frost nipped toes and ankles. Rain seeped through thin coats, and yet there was motion. They ran through the streets delivering newspapers, carrying milk or hawking matches and flowers. Some, like the mudlarks, spent their mornings wading through the Thames at low tide, searching for coins, rope, coal, or scraps of anything valuable. They often returned home wet, hungry, and covered in grime, but with a small prize to show for it. Every coin mattered. Every scrap could be exchanged for bread or saved for the next doss house fee. Others became chimney sweeps, climbing into narrow flues before they were fully grown. Their small bodies were an asset, but the work was brutal. Soot-filled lungs, cuts and bruises were common, and the overseers rarely offered mercy. Education, a patchwork. Some children attended charity schools or Sunday schools, but attendance was irregular. When work or survival interfered, lessons were skipped. Reading, writing, and arithmetic were privileges, not rights. Still, those who managed to learn a few letters or sums gained a secret advantage. Literacy could mean better work, better wages, and sometimes escape from the most brutal cycles of poverty. It was a slow, haphazard education, one of stolen moments and borrowed time. A boy might spend the morning selling newspapers and the afternoon sneaking into a schoolroom for instruction, all while his stomach grumbled and shoes leaked. Play in the shadows. Despite exhaustion and hunger, children found ways to play. The streets became fields and playgrounds. Piles of rags were castles. Alleyways were racetracks. Rats could be dragons. Puddles could be lakes. The play was messy, inventive, and sometimes dangerous, but it was vital. It gave the children an escape, a semblance of normalcy, a tiny claim to joy in a world that demanded survival above all. And it's worth noting, play often doubled as training. Running, climbing, balancing on barrels, or dodging carts built agility and awareness. By the time they were 12, many of these kids could navigate the streets faster and smarter than most adults, orphans and abandoned children. Many of these children had no parents, or parents who had vanished into illness, workhouses, or death. Orphaned children were often absorbed into the city's networks of survival. They lived with relatives if lucky, in doss houses if unlucky, or on the streets if desperate. Some became apprentices, taken in by tradesmen for food and shelter in exchange for labor. Others fell under the watchful eyes of charitable organizations, which might provide a roof, a meal, and sometimes the chance to learn a trade. But the streets themselves were always the ultimate teacher. They taught cunning, resilience, and the subtle art of invisibility, how to move without being noticed by police, by cruel adults, or by the hungry animals that shared the alleys. Health. Hunger and hardship. Hunger was constant. Malnutrition stunted growth, weakened immunity, and dulled the brightness of childhood. Disease thrived in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Smallpox, cholera, and tuberculosis were ever-present threats, and yet children endured. They learned to ration their energy, to scavenge creatively, to accept bruises and minor injuries as part of the day's routine. Every small survival counted. Some historians note that children's resilience in Victorian London was remarkable. They navigated a city indifferent to their existence, yet managed not only to survive but occasionally to thrive, carving out communities of friendship, humor, and shared struggle. Street families and mini communities, despite the chaos, informal communities formed. Groups of children looked out for each other. Older children often protected younger ones. Survival required cooperation, clever alliances, and an understanding of the city's invisible rules. These street families were both functional and emotional. They provided a sense of belonging in an otherwise hostile world. Even the tiniest acts, a shared scrap of bread, a rescued mitten, a quiet warning about a patrolling constable, were acts of survival, friendship, and humanity. Dreams beyond the fog, of course. Some children dreamed of more. They imagined shoes that fit, meals that weren't scraps, clean beds, and bright classrooms. They imagined a city that might notice them and care for them, even slightly. Those dreams were fragile, fleeting, but important. They were the seeds of hope, of ambition, of escape. Some would survive to see them realized. Others, well, most would carry them quietly, privately, as the fog rolled in again and swallowed the streets. The weight of growing up in London's shadowed streets was an education in endurance. It taught children the rhythms of danger and opportunity, the smell of smoke and damp, the subtle sounds that could signal a threat or a chance at survival. By adolescence, the children had become competent adults in miniature. They were quick, cautious, clever, and astonishingly resilient. And yet, their world remained narrow, bounded by the limits of poverty and the hazards of a city that often saw them as invisible. And so, as we drift slowly away from these smallest Londoners, we remember their childhood was unlike any we imagine today. It was both cruel and inventive, brutal and strangely beautiful. They survived in a city that refused to notice them, yet in surviving, they claimed a space for humanity where society had tried to erase it. Next, we'll float into Part 9, Fog, Fires, and the Fickle City, Daily Life in the East End's Maze, where we'll explore the rhythms, routines, and small catastrophes of a day in London's most forgotten neighborhoods. Let's drift quietly now into the heart of the East End, where streets twist like uncertain thoughts, fog clings to every corner, and life moves at a pace that's exhausting just to watch. This is the London that most outsiders never saw, a city of narrow alleys, soot-stained brick, and constant motion, where survival is both mundane and miraculous. Morning fog and the city awakening. The fog in London isn't just atmospheric. It's almost tactile, sticky, heavy, and persistent. In the East End, It wraps around the streets like a damp blanket, curling into doorways, seeping under shutters, and clinging to the hems of skirts and coats. People move through it carefully, aware of unseen puddles, stray carts, and the occasional aggressive dog. Smoke mingles with fog, creating a haze that makes the sun nearly invisible. It's a city that smells like industry, coal, and desperation, a perfume the poor know intimately. They inhale it with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For the children, it's normal. For newcomers, it can feel like a slowly tightening coil around your lungs. The soundtrack of survival life here is loud, but in a peculiar, methodical way. Carts rattle over uneven cobblestones. Horses clop with hooves thickened by tar. Vendors shout their wares: fish, eels, vegetables, secondhand clothes. Steam hisses from street vents. Dogs bark, children yell. Somewhere, a bell tolls, marking an hour no one cares to measure. And yet, through all this, people move in a rhythm. Each resident knows their place, their role, and the invisible rules of the maze. Miss one step, get hit by a cart, or stumble in the fog, and the city will remind you immediately why it doesn't tolerate mistakes. Markets and mini-cultures. The East End's markets are microcosms of the city. Stalls stacked high with fish, meat, vegetables, and cheap textiles. Shouts of vendors compete with the clatter of coins. Children weave between legs, dodging baskets and barrels. For those who live in doss houses nearby, the markets are both opportunity and hazard. Opportunities come in scraps: a dropped apple, a tipped basket of potatoes, or the chance to run an errand for a few pennies. Hazards come in thieves, scolding vendors, and the ever-present threat of being crushed in the tide of humanity. Markets are also social hubs. People exchange news, gossip, complaints, and small kindnesses. They are the veins through which the life of the neighborhood pulses. Hustle and labor. Every resident of the East End is engaged in some form of labor. Men haul goods, work in factories, or repair shoes. Women scrub, wash, sew, or care for children. Children sell newspapers, clean boots, or scavenge along the river. Every penny counts. Every hour is accounted for. The labor is exhausting. Shifts are long. Mistakes are punished with hunger or dismissal. And yet in this chaos, people find efficiency. They develop strategies for survival, networks of trust, and methods for stretching food, warmth, and patience further than should be humanly possible. Fires, accidents, and the fickle city. The city itself is unpredictable. Fires break out in narrow alleys, spreading quickly through timber-framed buildings. A careless lantern, a knocked-over candle, or a spark from the chimney can reduce entire blocks to ash. People escape with what they can carry. Some lose everything except for memory. Floods are less dramatic but equally disruptive. Heavy rains swell the Thames and overwhelm the sewers, sending water surging through streets and homes. The East End's lower floors often become ponds of filth and debris, forcing residents to wade through muck or retreat to higher ground. Community and resilience. Despite danger, the East End is not purely grim. Small communities emerge out of necessity. Families, neighbors, even children form networks of care and protection. Someone might alert the community to a fire. A neighbor might share bread. Older children watch the younger ones. These connections, fragile though they are the glue that holds survival together. Humor persists too, often dry and sarcastic. Jokes are whispered in foggy corners or shouted above the market clamor. It's a coping mechanism, a way to reclaim humanity in a city that relentlessly strips it away. Evening in the maze's day slips into evening. The East End transforms. Gas lamps flicker to life, casting long shadows. The fog thickens, blending with smoke from countless chimneys. People retreat indoors, where indoors often means a small, crowded room or a doss house bed. The streets don't quiet entirely. Rats scurry, carts rumble, and voices carry across alleyways. The city remains alive, persistent, unrelenting. And yet in the shadows there's a rhythm. People know when to move, when to hide, when to rest, and when to scavenge. It's a ballet of survival, rehearsed through repetition, necessity, and stubborn endurance. Small victories and hidden triumphs. Even in this maze, small victories exist. A man sells enough fish to pay for a night's lodging. A woman keeps her children fed. A child finds a coin in the muck. These victories are modest but profoundly human. They offer a sense of control in a city that rarely allows it. And sometimes, the East End delivers something bigger. A person finds a trade. A family escapes the alley. A reformer opens a new school or shelter. Change is slow, uneven, often invisible, but it happens. Drifting toward night by nightfall, the East End is quieter but not still. The fog clings heavier now. Fires in chimneys crackle. Shadows lengthen. The day's labor weighs on every body, yet there is survival, continuity, life, stubborn and relentless, moving into tomorrow. For the dossers, the workhouse children, the street hawkers, and the mudlarks, tonight will mean food if lucky, a warm corner if possible, and sleep if exhaustion allows. And in the quietest hours, the city itself seems to inhale, pause, and prepare for the cycle to begin again. Now, let's drift slowly, almost imperceptibly, out of the tangled alleys, foggy docks, and crowded courts of the East End. We've spent hours, days, in a sense, in the midst of Victorian London's underbelly, following the lives of those who labored, suffered, and endured without recognition. And yet the story isn't just about misery. It's about resilience, adaptation, and the subtle ways that these invisible lives shaped the city itself. The quiet architects of the city. It's easy to look at London in the 19th century and see only wealth, industry, and grandeur. But beneath the surface, the city's real infrastructure, the people who made it function, were often the poorest. The dossers, street children, laundresses, porters, and hawkers kept the wheels of daily life turning. They carried goods, cleaned streets, maintained fires, and moved messages, coins, and commodities from one corner to another. Without them, the city's elegance would have been a brittle facade. These lives were largely ignored by the maps of the wealthy, the memoirs of the literate, and the photographs of reformers. But in the rhythm of the city, in the turning of the mills, the filling of coffers, and the flow of water and waste, the presence of the poor was fundamental. The enduring shadow of the workhouses may have seemed like punitive institutions designed to erase individuality, but they also left a legacy. For decades, they defined the boundary between survival and destitution, and in doing so, they forced society to confront poverty, even if reluctantly. Reformers like Charles Booth, Octavia Hill, and Florence Nightingale began to shift public perception. They highlighted the humanity behind the numbers, the dignity behind the labor, and the resilience behind the ragged clothing. Slowly, the city recognized that the poor were not merely a problem to be hidden. They were participants in its life, shaping its rhythm, culture, and even morality. Cultural imprints, these invisible lives also left their mark culturally. Street markets, local dialects, songs, jokes, and folk traditions thrived in the alleys and courts of the East End. Victorian novels and social reform literature, from Dickens to Mayhew, were often inspired by these very communities, translating lived experience into narrative that would resonate for generations. Even the children, the smallest and most overlooked, contributed. Their cleverness, resilience, and networks of survival offered a blueprint for urban adaptation. Street smarts, agility, and improvisation became essential skills, not just for survival, but for the gradual transformation of society. Survival as resistance. Perhaps the most striking legacy of London's poor was survival itself. Living through hunger, disease, overcrowding, and institutional neglect was, in a sense, a quiet act of defiance. Every day that a street child scavenged successfully, that a woman found food for her children, that a man returned to a doss house without being arrested, these were victories, subtle but profound. It's easy to romanticize this resilience, but it was born of necessity. Yet, necessity can inspire ingenuity. Communities adapted, systems evolved, charity and reform responded slowly, imperfectly, and often grudgingly. And over time, the city itself became a little more navigable, a little less deadly, a little more capable of supporting life in all its messiness. The enduring lessons, looking back from the 21st century, there are lessons in these lives. Lessons about inequality, adaptation, and human endurance. The people of the doss houses, the street hawkers, and the workhouse children remind us that cities are shaped as much by the invisible and disregarded as by the visible and celebrated. They remind us that survival is not merely biological, it is social, cultural, and moral. The networks, communities, and subtle acts of care that persisted in foggy alleys and overcrowded rooms were the foundations of a functioning society, often ignored but indispensable. A gentle pause as night settles over London once more. Imagine the city quieting down, not completely, but enough for the ghosts of the doss houses, the workhouses, and the streets to breathe. You can almost hear their whispers. Faint but persistent, stories of endurance, hope, and humanity in a place designed to overlook them. And somewhere, in a warm bed far from the smoke, someone in the present might drift off to sleep thinking about these lives, carrying their resilience quietly into dreams. London, in all its grandeur, owes much to those who were never celebrated. Never remembered in marble or portrait, they built the city with their survival. They kept it running with their labor. They left traces in culture, memory, and social conscience. And in acknowledging them, we understand the city not as a monument to wealth or power, but as a tapestry woven with countless invisible threads. So, as we float out of the shadowed alleys, past the fog, and toward the quiet hum of the modern city, let's take a deep breath. We've walked alongside those who lived in London's margins. We've heard their rhythms, smelled their fog, and glimpsed their endurance. And though the streets have changed, the echoes remain. Let's drift once more, slowly, like smoke curling from a dying fire, into the lingering shadows of Victorian London. Part 10 closed the streets, the doss houses, and the workhouses behind us, but even as the city modernized, the echoes of those invisible lives persisted. London never forgets entirely. The bricks, the alleys, the cobblestones, they hold memory quietly, patiently. Step lightly now because the ghosts we're following are subtle. They aren't wailing specters or dramatic phantoms. They are the traces of existence, the residue of survival etched into the city itself, the faint imprint of the doss houses. Though most of the doss houses have vanished, replaced by modern flats or warehouses, their legacy lingers in urban planning and social memory. Narrow courts and hidden passageways, once alive with laughter, cries, and the shuffle of weary feet, now often hide behind grimy windows or locked gates. Yet, if you listen carefully, the rhythm of those spaces persists. A stray child darting past a corner, a hasty barter on a side street, even the smell of coal and damp air. It's almost as if the city keeps a faint heartbeat of its former residents. The workhouse legacy workhouses were eventually phased out, replaced by social housing, welfare systems, and public health initiatives. But their influence remained. Institutional memory, societal attitudes, and perhaps most importantly, the awareness that poverty could not simply be punished away. Many survivors carried the lessons of endurance into the next generation. Some became reformers themselves, quietly embedding empathy into policy and public consciousness. Others simply survived and bore witness, teaching children the subtle arts of vigilance, resourcefulness, and patience. Cultural ghosts. Even in literature, music, and folklore, the traces remain. Street cries, market songs, and the slang of the East End originated in these neighborhoods. Stories of clever children outwitting adults, women negotiating survival with dignity, and men finding humor in hardship were told again and again. These weren't just anecdotes, they were cultural transmission. Through humor, cunning, and creativity, the invisible Londoners influenced generations, often unknowingly, shaping the city's character in ways that formal history rarely acknowledges. The fog as memory fog, which we've followed so faithfully, becomes almost a metaphor here. It is thick, encompassing, and slightly obscuring, but it preserves as much as it hides. Within its damp folds lie the whispers of countless lives, the small, unnoticed acts of resilience, the quiet laughter of children playing in alleys, the whispered prayers of those in overcrowded rooms. Even today, when London fog rolls in, it's not entirely a weather phenomenon. It's a kind of living memory, carrying hints of footsteps, voices, and the distant hum of lives once lived in narrow spaces between wealth and want. Lessons from the forgotten drifting further, we can begin to see what Victorian London's invisible majority teaches us: resilience. Survival isn't glamorous, but it's persistent. Community. Even in harshest conditions, people form networks, care for one another, and preserve dignity. Adaptation. Life in foggy alleys, crowded dormitories, and relentless streets teaches ingenuity and resourcefulness. Legacy. Those who are ignored still leave traces, cultural, social, and moral. These lessons extend beyond history. They ripple into modern urban life. The forgotten streets of the past echo in contemporary neighborhoods, in the hidden communities and underappreciated labor that keep cities alive today. The gentle fade as night settles once more over London. The modern city hums above the remnants of the past. Trains clatter, cars roll, and the glow of streetlights replaces the flickering gas lamps. Yet the shadows of the past are never entirely gone. We imagine the dossers climbing into narrow beds, the children hurrying home through fog, the workhouse residents whispering prayers in their cots. They are gone in form but not in effect. They shape the city, its people, and its values quietly, persistently, a final reflection. And so, as we float through the faint echoes, the lesson remains soft but clear. History is not only the story of kings, laws, and battles. It is the story of those who survive unnoticed, who endure, and whose lives, though rarely celebrated, build the foundations of society. The ghosts of Victorian London are not frightening. They are gentle reminders. Life persists even when invisible. Resilience matters even when unrecognized. And humanity endures, even in the fog. With that, we close our long, quiet walk through the streets, doss houses, workhouses, and alleys of London. Rest easy now. Let the fog and the whispers fade as your own night swells softly around you. Let's drift once more, slowly, past the echoes of yesterday and into the soft twilight of memory. We've wandered through alleys, doss houses, workhouses, and markets. We've walked alongside children scavenging in the Thames mud, mothers carrying their burdens, men hauling goods, and reformers chasing faint glimmers of justice. But now let's pause and reflect on continuity, the thread that links all these invisible lives. Past and present, the city remembers, quietly. Even as London modernized, railways replacing horse-drawn carts, gas lamps replaced by electricity, and social reforms reshaping housing, the traces of the Victorian poor persisted. Alleyways, narrow courts, and hidden stairwells still bore the marks of countless footsteps. Names scratched on doors or walls, worn flagstones, and the faint remnants of old market stalls told stories that official history often ignored. The city's memory is subtle, encoded in patterns of labor, social networks, and culture. Cafes that serve as community hubs today sit atop what was once a workhouse courtyard. Children running through playgrounds may echo the footsteps of rag pickers, newsboys, and chimney sweeps from long ago. The city doesn't announce these connections, it whispers them. Invisible labor and modern parallels. One striking lesson from Victorian London is the persistence of invisible labor. The dossers, hawkers, laundresses, and children of the past remind us that cities rely on unseen effort. Today, while the work may be different, delivery drivers, cleaners, and underpaid service workers, the principle remains. Civilization functions quietly because of those who labor beyond notice. And just as in the past, survival often requires ingenuity, community, and resilience. Networks of care still form in overlooked corners, sometimes born from necessity, sometimes from choice. The city continues to operate as a layered organism, with its hidden gears humming silently beneath the visible surface. Cultural continuity, London's invisible residents also shaped its culture in ways both subtle and enduring. Street dialects, humor, music, and traditions often originated in neighborhoods of hardship. Many Victorian writers, photographers, and journalists documented these influences, transforming the raw experiences of the poor into narratives that have endured across centuries. The rhythm of the city, the markets, the alleys, the foggy streets, is part memory, part culture, and part persistence of human adaptation. In every corner, there is a dialogue between past and present, between those who built the city with their labor and those who now navigate it with convenience and abstraction. The fog as metaphor. The fog we've been following is not just a weather phenomenon, it's a metaphor. It obscures, softens, and sometimes hides, but it also preserves. It carries the faint echoes of footsteps, voices, and lives once lived. It reminds us that what is unseen is not necessarily insignificant. Survival, endurance, and adaptation often occur in quiet, invisible ways. The fog teaches patience and attentiveness. To notice it, one must move slowly, breathe carefully, and observe gently. The same could be said for history. The lives of the invisible demand attention, yet rewarded with insight, empathy, and quiet reflection. A gentle conclusion as we drift toward the end of this long journey through Victorian London. It's worth noting that history is not solely shaped by grandeur or notoriety. It is molded by quiet endurance, by the people who survive unseen, by the networks of care and ingenuity that keep life moving in harsh conditions. Doss houses, workhouses, narrow alleys, and foggy streets are not simply relics of the past. They are reminders of resilience, adaptation, and humanity. Their lessons remain, if only we are willing to notice them. Even in modern cities, in unseen corners, in quiet neighborhoods, echoes of those invisible lives persist. Their struggles, their cleverness, their patience, and their subtle acts of kindness continue to ripple outward. They remind us that society is not merely the sum of its laws and monuments, but also the quiet lives that sustain it. Drifting off, and so, as night falls gently over London once more, let us leave the city with respect and calm reflection. Imagine the faint footsteps fading into the mist, the children's laughter merging with fog, and the silent endurance of countless invisible lives settling into memory. You can now drift softly, carrying the gentle rhythm of the city, the resilience of its people, and the quiet lessons of history into your own rest. The fog will linger, but only to guide, never to frighten. The streets are quiet, the city breathes, and we too can rest, cradled by the soft, persistent pulse of lives that built, endured, and transformed a great city from the shadows. From the shadows. Let's drift once more, gently, through the fog of time, past the brick alleys, the narrow courts, and the workhouse walls, into the subtle traces that Victorian London leaves in today's city. Part 12 reflected on continuity. And now we move to consider the ways these invisible lives ripple far beyond their immediate circumstances. Echoes that still shape neighborhoods, communities, and human understanding. The modern city has layered memory walk through East London today, and it's a very different place. Cafes, modern apartments, neon signage, and tourist maps dominate. But beneath the shiny surfaces lie layers of memory, sedimented like geological strata. Every street carries stories of the past. Doss houses once tucked behind now modern shop fronts. Alleyways where children once scavenged for bread. Staircases that were once climbed by weary laundresses hauling wet sheets. These traces are subtle. They're not preserved in plaques or museums. Instead, they exist in patterns of settlement, cultural practices, and neighborhood resilience. Social networks that formed in hardship have echoes in modern communities. Informal childcare arrangements, support for neighbors in need, and small acts of mutual aid that quietly sustain urban life. Invisible labor. Then and now one lesson from Victorian London's underclass is the universality of invisible labor. In the 19th century, it was children scavenging by the Thames, women scrubbing laundry, men hauling goods. Today, it's delivery drivers, cleaners, construction workers, and service staff. Often overlooked, underpaid, and underappreciated, this labor still sustains the city's rhythm. By tracing the patterns of survival, resourcefulness, and ingenuity from Victorian times to the present, we see that cities thrive on contributions that rarely make headlines. The echoes of past resilience inform contemporary urban life, even if the participants never consciously recognize it. Cultural continuity's art, literature, and social observation preserve these invisible lives. Dickens, Mayhew, and other chroniclers of the East End immortalized the humor, cleverness, and endurance of the poor. Today, music, film, and literature continue to explore similar themes. Comedy rooted in survival, community solidarity, And streetwise cleverness can be seen as a direct cultural descendant of Victorian East End storytelling. Even local customs, slang, and folklore carry faint imprints of these lives. They persist in ways that are often unnoticed, but culturally vital, providing cohesion, identity, and continuity. Lessons for Modern Society, reflecting on these lives, offers quiet but profound lessons for today. Resilience is cultivated, not inherited. Survival in harsh conditions fosters adaptability and ingenuity. Community matters. Mutual aid, small acts of kindness, and informal networks are essential, past and present. Recognition transforms understanding. Seeing invisible labor and invisible lives fosters empathy and better social systems. Memory lives in spaces. Streets, alleys, and neighborhoods carry historical memory, quietly shaping modern urban experience. These lessons encourage us to notice what is unseen, to honor endurance, and to value humanity beyond visible achievement or wealth. The gentle persistence of the past fog has been our constant companion, softening edges, blurring lines, and teaching attentiveness. In Part 13, it becomes a metaphor for memory itself. The past is never entirely clear, yet it lingers, shaping perceptions, informing present actions, and guiding subtle choices. Victorian London's invisible lives, children, dossers, workhouse residents, persist as gentle, instructive echoes. They remind us that history isn't only written in stone or in official records. It exists in human behavior, in resilience, and in the quiet persistence of ordinary people. A soft farewell as we drift further into modern London, past the fog, past the echoes, and into calm awareness. We can let the story settle. The city breathes, not only through infrastructure and commerce, but through memory, continuity, and subtle human endurance. Rest now, carrying the gentle rhythm of the past with you. Imagine the footsteps fading softly into mist, the quiet laughter of children long gone, and the enduring heartbeat of lives that built the city quietly, persistently, invisibly. History, as we've discovered tonight, is often silent, and sometimes the quietest voices leave the deepest marks. Let's drift once again, gently, into the hidden alleys and side streets of London, where time seems to fold over itself. We've wandered through doss houses, workhouses, foggy markets, and invisible labor. Now, in Part 14, we focus on the stories that never made it into books, census records, or official accounts. The whispers that lingered in doorways, over fences, and in the quietest corners of the city. Stories that never left the streets. Many of Victorian London's poorest residents left no trace beyond memory. Children who scavenged for pennies, women who labored from dawn to dusk, men who carried goods through the fog. They rarely appeared in archives. Yet their lives were full of tiny dramas, subtle triumphs, and quiet endurance. A boy might have saved a coin to buy a loaf of bread for his younger sibling. A laundress might have gone without to ensure her family had clean sheets. A doss house resident might have organized a clandestine card game to momentarily escape the oppressive monotony. These are the stories of survival, unrecorded but real. The neighborhood as a living chronicle, every street, courtyard, and stairwell acted as a canvas for these lives. Marks on walls, scratches in wood, worn flagstones, they were the footprints of the invisible. Markets were more than commerce. They were theaters of negotiation, performance, and observation. Children learned streetwise tactics here, navigating danger, opportunity, and social hierarchy simultaneously. Even small acts of kindness became part of a community chronicle. A neighbor lending a coat, sharing food, or watching a child for an hour. Their significance is often invisible to history, but for those who lived it, these were monumental. Humor and subtle resistance. Humor was another survival tool. In crowded rooms, foggy alleys, and dreary doss houses, laughter, quiet, sardonic, sometimes absurd, offered relief. Street rhymes, teasing, and ironic commentary on city life created small cultural ripples. They allowed people to assert a sense of control and maintain a fragile sense of dignity. These moments, subtle as whispers, became a form of resistance, They didn't challenge institutions directly, but they preserved humanity, creativity, and spirit in an environment designed to suppress them. The invisible teacher's life itself became education. Children learned to read social cues, estimate distances in fog, barter, and anticipate danger. Adults learned endurance, improvisation, and patience. The streets and alleys acted as classrooms. The doss houses taught self-reliance. Workhouses, in their oppressive way, taught resilience. This informal, unrecorded education shaped Londoners profoundly. Skills that were invisible in their time, adaptability, observation, and social intelligence, later influenced broader society in subtle ways. The lingering echoes even today, faint traces remain. Modern streets, neighborhood patterns, local sayings, and community behaviors are partly inherited from these invisible histories. Cafes, corner shops, and cultural events echo long-gone networks of survival. The city is a palimpsest. Beneath every layer of modernization, faint stories persist. London, in this sense, is alive not only because of infrastructure or population, but because of memory. Persistent, subtle, and enduring, a quiet reflection. As the fog thickens one last time, we can pause to appreciate these hidden lives. They were small, unseen, and often ignored, but they were vital. Their endurance, creativity, humor, and subtle acts of humanity shaped a city, influenced culture, and left traces still detectable in patterns of life, both past and present. These whispers, though soft, carry lessons. They remind us to notice the unnoticed, value subtle endurance, and recognize the quiet persistence that sustains society. Let's settle gently now, letting our pace slow almost to nothing as we reach the final stretch of our journey through Victorian London's shadowed streets. We've wandered through foggy alleys, doss houses, workhouses, markets, and hidden lives. We've followed children scavenging in mud, adults laboring unseen, and communities persisting in quiet resilience. And now, we drift toward reflection, closure, and the calm night that finally allows the city and us to rest. A city of quiet heroes, London was never built solely by the wealthy, the powerful, or the famous. Its survival depended on countless quiet acts, often invisible to history. The doss house resident who shared a scrap of bread, the laundress who labored tirelessly to keep her family alive, the children who scavenged and sold what they could. These were the real architects of urban life. They moved through fog, filth, and overcrowding, yet left traces, subtle, enduring, and instructive. Their stories, though often absent from textbooks and monuments, are vital threads in the city's fabric. The persistence of memory. Even as streets modernized, workhouses closed, and doss houses vanished, the memory of these lives lingered. Neighborhood culture, local humor, street smarts, and communal resilience all carry echoes of the past. The city remembers quietly, in patterns, rhythms, and the subtle ways communities adapt and survive. The fog itself serves as a metaphor for memory. It obscures, softens, and preserves. We can see only fragments of the past, but those fragments are enough to understand resilience, endurance, and subtle acts of humanity. Lessons from invisible lives reflecting on these lives. Several gentle lessons emerge. Endurance matters. Daily survival is a quiet but profound act of strength. Community sustains. Networks of care, small acts of help, and cooperation persist across generations. Memory lives in places. Streets, alleys, and neighborhoods carry the history of those who passed through them. Humor and creativity survive hardship. Even in the harshest conditions, humans preserve spirit and dignity. These are not dramatic lessons. They are quiet, meditative, and persistent, the same qualities that allowed London's invisible residents to endure. A gentle farewell to the city as night fully settles over London. Imagine the fog rolling gently through the streets, past emptied markets, silent doss houses, and closed workhouses. The city inhales and exhales, carrying centuries of invisible lives within its rhythm. Footsteps fade, laughter diminishes, and the quiet hum of endurance persists beneath the modern noise. And in this quiet, the city allows itself and us to rest. We leave behind the hardships, The scavenging, the labor, and the subtle dramas, carrying instead the soft lessons of resilience, community, and invisible endurance. Drifting into sleep, let the fog and the echoes of Victorian London settle around you. Imagine the faint traces of children playing in alleys, of neighbors sharing scraps of bread, of quiet acts of care threading through time. Let the stories of survival, subtle humor, and quiet dignity dissolve gently into your mind. The streets are empty. The city breathes softly. And now, you too can drift, carried by the rhythm of human endurance, into calm, deep, and restorative sleep. Let's drift one final time, softly, through the lingering glow of gas lamps that once flickered across London's alleys. Even after Part 15's gentle farewell, there's one more layer to explore. The quiet pulse of the city itself, beneath the fog, beyond the workhouses, and alongside the invisible lives that carried it forward. The rhythm of everyday survival Victorian London moved in cycles: dawn, labor, twilight, and night. But beneath this apparent routine, there was an underlying rhythm, the invisible pulse of survival. The city functioned like an enormous organism, with each unnoticed person a vital cell. Men hauling coal, women scrubbing laundry, children hawking newspapers. They weren't performing heroic deeds, but their persistence allowed everything else to operate smoothly. Without them, the markets would halt, streets would decay, and the city's hum would falter. Their labor was quiet, uncelebrated, yet indispensable. Gaslight and shadow gas lamps created a peculiar duality. They offered warmth, guidance, and the illusion of safety. But shadows lingered longer in their flicker, exaggerating alleys, twisting corners, and softening edges. These shadows mirrored the lives of the city's forgotten residents, present, persistent, often unseen, but shaping perception and movement in subtle ways. Walking beneath a gaslit street, one could sense the past and present overlapping. Footsteps echo faintly, as if children long gone were still darting between lampposts. Women carrying bundles pause in the mist. Men trudge through foggy streets, coal dust clinging to their coats. It's not literal, it's memory, culture, and endurance wrapped into light and shadow. Networks of care, even in harsh conditions, invisible networks sustained the city. A neighbor lending a meal, a child warning another about a patrol, or a group pooling coins to pay for a doss house bed. All quiet acts that reinforced survival. These networks weren't formal. They weren't recorded in city plans. They existed in practice, in instinct, and in human adaptability. They were survival strategies and community bonds entwined. And in many ways, these same patterns persist in modern urban life, though often less visibly. The city as memory keeper. London itself becomes a vessel for memory. Streets, alleys, and buildings act like archives, preserving fragments of human life. The faint scratches on walls, worn steps, and lingering smells of coal and smoke all tell stories. For those who look closely, or listen carefully, the city reveals the echoes of invisible lives. It's not a dramatic revelation. It's a soft, patient reminder that history isn't only the famous or the powerful. It's built on the persistence, ingenuity, and quiet endurance of everyday people. A meditative pause. As the gaslight flickers one last time, we can pause to absorb the lesson. The streets are quiet. The fog drifts slowly through alleys. Memories of labor, survival, and subtle human interactions settle like dust. The pulse of the city continues, rhythmic and persistent. And in acknowledging these hidden lives, we honor endurance, adaptability, and the subtle contributions that shape not only Victorian London but modern urban experience as well. Final drift now. As night deepens, imagine the city breathing softly, alive with invisible histories. Footsteps fade, shadows lengthen, and the faint rhythm of survival continues beneath every street and corner. Rest now, carrying with you the quiet lessons of London's forgotten residents, resilience, resourcefulness, and the enduring pulse of humanity. Let the fog, the gaslight, and the invisible rhythms of the city lull you into calm, gentle sleep. Let's drift once more, softly, through the hidden mechanisms of Victorian London. If Part 16 guided us along gaslit streets and quiet pulses, Now we turn attention to the silent architects, the people whose hands shaped, maintained, and sustained the city, largely unnoticed. The labor that built London. London's grandeur often distracts from the truth. The city functioned because of unseen labor. Cobblestones were laid, sewers dug, streets swept, laundry washed, and coal carried, all by hands that never appeared in records, portraits, or newspapers. These were the silent architects, the invisible workforce holding the city together. Doss House residents often took small jobs wherever possible, running errands, cleaning or carrying goods for slightly better off neighbors. Street children scavenged, recycled, and sold what they could. Women labored in homes or laundries. Each act, mundane to some, formed the infrastructure of daily life. Adaptation and ingenuity. Life in such harsh conditions required quiet ingenuity. A child might repurpose a broken wheelbarrow for scavenging. A laundress could stretch coal to last through 2 nights. A Doss House resident would improvise a bed from discarded crates. This adaptation was not extraordinary in the heroic sense. It was ordinary ingenuity, subtle but profound, and it allowed survival in a city that often seemed indifferent to human need. Invisible communities. Even amidst overcrowding, filth, and labor, communities formed. People shared beds, food, and advice. They warned each other of dangers, police raids, fires, or collapsing structures. They supported one another in subtle, almost invisible ways, creating social bonds that were crucial for survival. The community wasn't formalized. It had no councils, no official structure, but it existed, persistent, self-organizing, and adaptive. These networks were the true backbone of the city's daily life. The long shadow of workhouses loomed as both literal and symbolic centers of control. Harsh, regimented, and often cruel, they nevertheless taught resilience. Residents learned endurance, patience, and resourcefulness. They acquired skills, some practical, some social, that allowed them to navigate life beyond the walls. Ironically, the workhouse's strictness inadvertently fostered ingenuity. Survival required subtlety, careful observation, and quiet negotiation, traits that the city itself would come to depend on in the shadows. Lessons carried forward. The lessons of these invisible lives extend beyond Victorian London. Persistence matters, daily effort. Even unseen sustains society. Community sustains. Networks of care are essential, even without formal recognition. Adaptation is subtle. Small acts of ingenuity allow survival in harsh systems. Memory persists. Even when unrecorded, human impact leaves traces in culture, geography, and society. These are the quiet truths that continue to resonate in modern urban life, often unnoticed, but always foundational. A gentle close for reflection as we drift through the alleys, past Doss houses and long-vanished workhouses. Imagine the hands that built, maintained, and sustained this city. They are invisible in records, but present in rhythm, pattern, and continuity. The city moves because of them, and their legacy pulses faintly beneath every street, market, and courtyard. Rest now, allowing this quiet understanding of endurance, ingenuity, and invisible labor to settle around you. Let the streets, the fog, and the subtle traces of human persistence lull you into calm, meditative sleep. Let's drift again, slowly, through the lingering fog of London, both literal and metaphorical. If Part 17 introduced us to the city's silent architects, now we focus on the environment itself, the fog, the streets, the air, and how it preserves memory, shapes behavior, and reflects the persistence of invisible lives. Fog. As witness fog in Victorian London was more than a weather pattern. It clung to walls, rolled along alleys, seeped into Doss houses, and settled thickly around workhouses. For the people living amidst it, it was a constant companion, sometimes oppressive, sometimes comforting, but always present. It softened the harsh edges of the city. It hid mistakes, missteps, and failures. It also preserved subtle traces of life, footprints on damp cobblestones, smoke curling from chimneys, and whispered conversations carried just above the ground. The fog became a witness to invisible labor, endurance, and daily survival. The rhythm of fog and life and fog were intertwined. Children scavenged more carefully when visibility was low. Women hauling laundry relied on memory and landmarks. Men transporting goods adjusted their pace and routes. Every day, the fog dictated patterns, enforced caution, and shaped the rhythm of survival. And yet, it was never entirely oppressive. Within its muted embrace, communities adapted, humor survived, and ingenuity thrived. It became both a literal and metaphorical layer through which the city's invisible lives moved with subtle grace. Memory encoded in environment, the city's streets, alleys, and buildings carry memory in ways beyond written records. Worn steps, crooked walls, and hidden passageways are silent testimonies to countless unseen lives. The fog, ever present, emphasizes these traces, softening them yet making them persistent. Even modern London retains echoes of this memory. Neighborhoods, street layouts, and cultural rhythms are subtly informed by the behaviors, adaptations, and endurance of past residents. The invisible past shapes the visible present. Persistence beyond visibility. One of the quietest lessons of Victorian London is that impact need not be visible to be profound. Labor, care, ingenuity, and endurance leave traces even if no one commemorates them. Doss House residents, workhouse children, street hawkers, and laundresses were never famous. Yet without them, the city could not function. The fog, the streets, and the faint imprint of their lives remind us that persistence matters. Quiet, unseen acts accumulate, creating continuity and sustaining society. Reflection and closure. As we drift gently through the fog, imagine the city settling into a soft rhythm. Footsteps fade, smoke curls from chimneys, and whispers of human endurance linger in the air. Invisible hands have shaped, carried, and sustained the city, and their legacy hums softly beneath every street. Let's drift further, softly, along streets where the fog has thinned but memory still lingers. If Part 18 reflected on the fog as witness, now we follow the faint footsteps, the traces left by Victorian London's invisible residents. Echoes of lives that never appeared in history books but shaped the city nonetheless. Footsteps in the alley. Every cobblestone in East London has been pressed by countless feet. Children darting between market stalls, women carrying bundles, men hauling coal or goods. Each step was small, quiet, and seemingly insignificant. Yet together they created the rhythm of a living city. These faint footsteps, though long gone, persist in the shape of streets, in the patterns of neighborhoods, and in the cultural habits of communities. They are silent markers of endurance, ingenuity, and subtle adaptation. Endurance in small acts life in doss houses, workhouses, and narrow alleys was measured not in grand achievements, but in small, repeated acts. Sharing a scrap of food, improvising a bed, finding warmth in a damp room. These actions were often invisible to outsiders, yet they preserved dignity, created community, and allowed survival to continue. The quiet endurance of such lives is a lesson in persistence. Survival need not be heroic or celebrated. It can be cumulative, subtle, and transformative over time. Memory in objects and spaces, even objects and spaces carry memory. A worn stair, a bent gate, a scratched tabletop, they all hint at the presence of lives that passed through. Modern streets retain these imprints, faint but perceptible to those who observe carefully. This invisible history teaches us that the mundane, the overlooked, and the unrecorded are often the foundation of continuity. Civilization depends on what is unseen as much as what is visible. Reflections for the listener as we drift further. It's helpful to notice the quiet persistence around us, the rhythms of streets, the architecture, the social patterns. They are echoes of human effort, ingenuity, and endurance. In honoring them, we honor not just history, but the subtle ways humanity sustains itself in adversity. A soft closing now, as the city exhales and night deepens, let the footsteps fade into mist. Imagine children playing softly in alleyways, women tending to chores, men carrying burdens, quiet lives leaving traces in the shape of streets, culture, and memory. Now let's drift into the final reflections slowly as night settles fully over London. We've walked alleys, lingered in doss houses, felt the fog, followed faint footsteps, and warmed ourselves by invisible hearths. Part 20 is about letting the city and ourselves rest, carrying all the lessons of resilience, endurance, and quiet human ingenuity into a calm, meditative conclusion. The city at rest even, the busiest streets eventually grow quiet. Markets close, coal deliveries end, and street children disappear into narrow stairways and alleys. The fog thickens slightly, softening edges, muting the city's pulse. Gas lamps flicker one last time, their gentle glow mirrored by the faint memories of countless lives. The doss houses are silent, the workhouses empty, but memory persists in the architecture, the worn flagstones, and the soft rhythm of the streets. The city breathes quietly, carrying the invisible lives of Victorian London in every crevice and shadow. Reflection on invisible lives. What we've followed tonight are not the stories of kings, generals, or famous events. They are the quiet narratives of those often forgotten. Children scavenging to survive, women laboring unseen, men hauling communities sustaining themselves in subtle, ingenious ways. These lives mattered. Their endurance, humor, ingenuity, and care formed the backbone of a functioning city. Without them, London, as we know it, could not exist. Memory beyond records history is often recorded in monuments, books, and official accounts. But some of the most important history is unrecorded. It lives in behavior, in cultural rhythms, in the patterns of neighborhoods, and in the subtle traces left in streets, doorways and alleys, the fog, the footsteps. And the hearths we've imagined tonight serve as gentle reminders. Invisibility does not equal insignificance. Quiet persistence shapes culture, society, and human connection in ways that endure. A meditative drift as we drift with the city into complete calm. Imagine the streets softening, alleys emptying, and every flicker of human effort settling into memory. Footsteps fade. Children sleep. Women and men rest after another long day. The fog curls gently around corners, carrying faint whispers of endurance and subtle joy. Allow yourself to absorb this quiet rhythm. Let it seep into your thoughts. Life persists in small, unnoticed ways. Humanity endures even where it is unseen. And in this awareness, we find a soft peace. Final rest. The city exhales. Footsteps, laughter, and toil dissolve into fog. Gas lamps flicker out. The streets, alleys, and hidden corners rest. And now, you too can rest. Carried by the gentle pulse of invisible lives, the soft persistence of memory, and the quiet heartbeat of a city that never forgets its foundations. Sleep now. The city sleeps. And in this rest, history, memory, and humanity are all gently cradled together.